Today's topic is the new data import. So the data import facility that we've added to Stratum to make it very easy for people to take an Excel file and bring that data into Stratum. And I'll show an example or two of that time permitting here. I'll get at least one done, maybe another. But first, I thought it would be important to talk a little bit about our overall strategy here and what we're doing with Stratum. And why did we add a data import for Excel to Stratum? So a little bit about that. We have a strategy, or one of the strategies we have from our product development side is we call it UCD, User Controlled Data, and it's an effort to make it simpler and easier to get information into Stratum, in particular for analysts and not necessarily require IT to help with that. We certainly don't want to not have a path for IT, and the path that we use today to get information into Stratum continues. We're making that easier as well. You'll hear more about our new Stratham Link product that helps to get information into Stratum for more complex sources than Excel, say a database or somewhere on the internet or something like that. So there's options for that as well. As far as the strategy goes, you've been able to see it in a couple of the releases as we've moved forward here. One of the first things is we introduced in 7.0, which is the latest general available version of Stratum, our data copy piece. And that was to allow moving data from one category to another, typically used to create sales plans. But can be used for anything if you want to archive a copy of something or anything like that. So lots of options on how you could use that. The second piece that's coming out around that, around our UCD strategy, is what we're seeing today. That's the data import, and this will be in 7.1. 7.1 of Stratum will be released on or about January 20th. You'll see the GA announcement for that. I'm actually obviously going to be in a copy of 7.1. We've gone through a beta controlled release process. Internally have been through making some first round of some minor fixes, and we're ready to go. So we're wrapping that up, and we'll get that out after the holidays. The other piece of the user-controlled data strategy that you'll see an announcement for, also associated with our 7.1 version, is Stratham Link, as I mentioned earlier. This is a new product that allows you, from a website, from your browser, very easily connect up to a data source and use Stratum as a data target to move data between those things. And it really allows someone that's got some database acumen but maybe not programming skills to be able to move very complex information into Stratum. So that's one of the things that we want to provide there, and that includes not only this mapping facility, but also a improved and simplified way to get information into Stratum in general, which can be used which we call the generic import, which can be used in conjunction with Stratham Link or actually any other ETL, maybe the ETL you're using today, but it simplifies that process as well. So that's another new part of 7.1. Today we're going to, as I mentioned, focus on the Excel data import, looking kind of down the road a little bit and what the next steps in our UCD strategy, our user-controlled data strategy is. 7. Later this year, or later next year, I should say. You'll see us come out with what we call our attribute import. An attribute import is going to allow a user to take a spreadsheet and say, hey, on the product or on the customer, whatever, some dimension in Stratum, and say, I want to add some additional attributes to that to create some new roll-ups. And that could be, say, a new product categorization or something like that that maybe doesn't come from your ERP. So you can add attributes that are specific for analysis that may not be included in your ERP system, and that's something that you'll see coming down the road not too long into 2020. So that's just the overview. Let's get down to what we're focused on today. Today's focus is the data import and importing data into Stratum using the data import, and it's part of our planning module. So a little setup here. It's part of the planning module, and you have to have access to that. I'll go over here to help actually and search on data import. Should be one of the first things that comes up here. Yep, there we go. So we'll search on that, and I'm going to go to working with data import. So if you guys haven't used this part of the help before, it's really great. It has a whole bunch of stuff that you can see about a topic that's working with portions in our help. But this has all of the different requirements, et cetera, for data import. So one of the requirements is that you have planning. A current requirement is that you're running Stratum on SQL. So things like that, and it talks about some of the setup that you need to do, all those tips, techniques. It talks about concepts, FAQs, any problems you might have had. There's a whole list of things here that are very helpful about using data import. And you can start with the access and the getting started and move through it. But a couple of things that I think were important here we're talking about. Let's see. There's a new feature to get started, which is really categories and making them available for data import. So one of the first things here is we're opening the door for users to bring data into Stratum, and that at a certain level is great. At a certain level, it could be a little scary. Now we've got somewhat uncontrolled or certainly even possibly non-vetted information coming into Stratum. So our concept here isn't for you to open the door for them to update sales or that what we think of as corporately controlled data that you have today, but maybe bring in some data that they want to surround that data with or compare it to that data too. It might be a plan. One of the example I'm going to show today is actually I've exported a bunch of data from a CRM system, and I want to bring what are called opportunities. So these are our sales guys are out there opening and creating sales opportunities that look out in the future. And I've got that from a pretty typical CRM system, and I want to bring that data into Stratum and then use it independently, maybe look at it and just look at the opportunities, what's out there. And then I also want to use it. I'll show an example of putting it up in a scorecard as well as part of my customer scorecard. I want to include that information as part of the scorecard. So I have an easy way for a user to do that. And that's what one of my examples is. So, but one of the first things you'd have to do is make a category available for user-controlled data. And this just talks a little bit about it. I won't go through the help here. Instead, I'll just go into Stratum and kind of show some of that. So my first concept here is I've got a category for opportunities. So I have a category. It's part of the base Stratum definition if you're using our Stratum implementation, and it's the OA category for those of you that care. But if I was to go into admin, I can see there's a new category maintenance right here, and I'm going to bring that up. Big long list of categories. I've got a gajillion categories. Most of them I have this data being controlled in what we call corporately. But if I search for my opportunity category, you'll see here it is. And note that I flipped this to user. So what's significant about this being user controlled? The very first thing is only user controlled categories can be used in data import. So a user, if they have access to data import, can only move data to user control categories. So I'm not going to go ahead and set up my my sales categories, et cetera, as user controlled, right? Those are going to be corporate, and the users don't have access to that. The second part of that is for those of you that might care about some of the behind the scenes things that are going on, if you were to look in Stratum server, you're going to find a totally different table setup than our traditional header and detail for the data. So this is a new table architecture that we provide. You'll see us begin to expand on this architecture. It's what we call the fact table, but won't go through it in detail here today, but this table is where information when you use the data import goes. And we'll use this table for other things as time moves on. It puts the data in a more friendly format for applications maybe outside of Stratum that want to take advantage of Stratum information. So it's just another feature of Stratum that we've done to help make things a little more accessible and usable in Stratum after you've gone and you've collected data into what we call the Stratum Data Hub, and you have it sitting there. We want you to be able, obviously, to use Stratum to get to that information, but we want you to use other tools as well and be able to have one of the ones we've had for a long time is you can attach Excel to our stuff, but you can also maybe start using it in Microsoft's ML Studio for machine learning. Maybe you want to use Power BI, things like that. So a lot of different things that we're doing with that data. So that's just another thing that happens behind the scenes. Nothing for you to do. And in fact, if the category you're using for data import had data in it, had old data in the old data structures. That data is not lost. It's sitting out there in Stratum server, but it is no longer imported into Stratum. So the next time you do a build of your cube, that data will not show up. Which brings another interesting thing is if you're importing data using the new data import facility, it is not available to Stratum Planner users. So any of you that are still using the old Stratum Planner interface, be aware that the data you import this way is not available to users that are coming into Stratum that way. Okay, so this is really all the setup you need to do is create that category and set it to user, which we've already done, or I've already done. So the next thing that we would want to do is import a spreadsheet. So I thought it might be interesting just to take a quick look at the spreadsheet that I'm going to import. So amazingly enough, I have that spreadsheet here and open. So you can see the spreadsheet here. It's pretty straightforward. I've got a header row in it. I've got a bunch of information that I'll go through here and show to you. I've got a date. So this is the date. We call this a transaction spreadsheet. So there's transaction dates going. The transaction date is in a column somewhere somehow. Then in here I've got the division. I've got the sales rep. I've got the customer. I've got the brand. I've got the product. And I've got some information that really led me to some other numbers here. The list price and the standard cost are coming off the item. I've got some, then I've got from the actual CRM system, I've got how many units was this customer going to buy of this product, or are we expecting them to buy? What is the pricing that we provided them? And then what was that opportunity at list price, so I can calculate some discounting when I'm in Stratum. And then what would be the standard cost of those items, so I can do some gross margin calculations when I'm in Stratum as well. So I'm going to ultimately want to import these four measures right here, which are the amount, the units amount, opportunity at list price, and the standard cost. I also want to import the dimensions out here, right? So I'm going to want to import the division, the sales rep, the customer, the brand, the product. I don't really care about the names of these things. Stratum already knows those. It's going to pull those in off of the key, so we're good with that. And the list price, et cetera, these are just pickup fields. These would just be pickup fields in Stratum, so we're not going to import those either. And then the date, date tells us where to map this data to in Stratum, so I got to have a date on all this stuff. So this is the spreadsheet. And in fact, let me change a couple things because I have already imported this spreadsheet once, and I want to show you guys a feature. So I'm going to call this the the opportunity date, something like that, just to give it a different name so that it won't. And over here, I'll call this the that was the division. Maybe this, I'll call this the PRD brand, just to give this a different name so Stratum doesn't recognize it. And I'll explain that in just a second. And then the other thing is, let's change one of these. You can see I've already messed around with this. Let's change one of these to be invalid. So this is not a valid sales rep. I'll just put 908 in here, which I know is not a valid rep. So let me update that. So update the spreadsheet. The other thing on this spreadsheet, just so you're aware to get an idea of the volume, you can see I'm importing about just under 12,000 rows here. So this spreadsheet has 12,000 rows in it, and we're going to import that. So that's the spreadsheet we're going to import. So let's go ahead and go into data import here. So a couple of things here. When I go into data import, there's really two ways to get there. One is I can go into admin, and you'll see there's a new data import facility. The other thing you can do is if you want certain analysts to have this, but you don't want to give them the admin group, which, by the way, if you give someone the admin group and they are not a security administrator, they're, say, a view administrator or a advanced user, they're only going to get select things here. They're not going to get everything that's in the admin utilities. That's been a feature of Stratum since the inception. But what someone sees based on their role and their type is very limited, depending on if they're a security administrator. They see everything if they're a security administrator. But if they're a view administrator, it's limited. And if they are a advanced user, it's very limited. Or the other thing you can do is create a user link. And I've created a user link up here in my favorites just to show you what that looks like. So a user link, you can create these in Stratum, and these are just links to other things. These are URLs that you can add here, you can see there's a little indication this is a link, and if I click on the data import link, it takes me into data imports. So this is what that looks like. So I'm going to go ahead, and the first thing I do, if I'm going to add a new data import, I just clicked on the plus sign there. It brings this up. So this is just Windows finding a file on your system. Obviously, it's looking for Excel worksheets. That's what we can import here. The help actually has some tips on what you can do to your spreadsheets, because there's two kinds of spreadsheets we'll import, and hopefully I'll get a chance to show you both. But here's that spreadsheet I was working on. I'm going to go ahead and open that. So right now that thing's being imported into Stratum, and if we, just while I'm waiting on that, that'll take just a minute. It's being imported, I shouldn't say into Stratum, it's being imported into a work area that allows us to then do some validation and things on that spreadsheet. But going back to working with the data import here, I just wanted to show some of the things here. So you can see in the background there, the sheet's been imported. So that actually moved that sheet from my PC up to our server, which is located off-site somewhere. Yeah, but you can see these are some of the questions that people have asked that when we've been doing some testing. So down here, I scrolled down in the help, just so you're aware as you're working through this. There's a bunch of different things here that people have asked, or questions that have come up as we demoed this to customers, and all those answers are right here in the help. I think our folks did a great job at getting some of that stuff in there. So here we have the spreadsheet. I've imported the spreadsheet. You can see this is what we call the data mapping panel, and a couple of things here so that we can see everything. First, I'm going to hide this. So I'm just looking at the data mapping here, and as you go across, the stuff in green is the header. So I can configure this. You can see here, the first thing is I want to replace my data. So I'm going to replace my data. The target category, in this case, I only have one, but if that drop down category I can import to. But if I have multiple categories, they'd be listed there. And then you have two formats. One is transactions. So transactions means there's a column in your spreadsheet that has a date in it that you want Stratum to import to. If it was time series, that would be classically for a budget or a plan where you have, say, the months going across the top. You have January through December or whatever your fiscal is, normally 12 months going across the top of the spreadsheet. And I'll show you an example of that after I'm done with this one. How many header rows? In my case, there was just one header row. And since I said transactions, I don't need to worry about the row that contains the date. So I'm going to say OK, and that goes out, and it's just validating that my spreadsheet kind of fits that format that I've just entered there. So again, it's doing validation through all the rows right now and looking at stuff. So let's see. What we can do here is, what we need to do once I have that spreadsheet here, you can see now I have the replace option. I've got to map this to Stratum. So a couple of things are going on as we look across the columns. I've imported this spreadsheet before, and Stratum remembers any headers that you've used and mapped those to specific things in Stratum. And when I say map them, you have three choices. If I look at this first column, if you remember, I changed the name of this, so it didn't know what to do with it yet because it hasn't seen that. So I can map something. I actually have four choices. But three choices to map. I can map something to a dimension, a measure, or a date. And in this case, this is a date, so I want to put that in. And it actually recognized the format of the date here. But you can see if you have your date in different formats, you can have a lot of different date formats. So this is the date it's going to use. Division, since I've used the column header div, it knows that this is a dimension, and to map it to the division. Here, I've never mapped anything called division name. This is just the name of the dimension. The description of the division. I'm going to ignore that. I don't need that to be imported. Same with salesperson. I've done this before, so it mapped that up. And it found that. Customer sold to, it knew that. These others, I think, did I change this? Yeah, see here, product brand, it doesn't know. I remember I changed this in my example. So this is a dimension. Got to select target. I'm going to go down and I'm going to pick product. What is this? Product brand, right? I'm going to pick product brand. So it's going to now map. Now the next, if I was ever going to import another spreadsheet, it would know that product brand is related. PRD brand, I typically wouldn't say product brand. So I think you guys probably get the mapping concept. That's pretty straightforward. Now I'm going out here to the measures, and you can see here, again, because I've done this before, but it's already mapped them. But here you can see it knows that once you say measure, you get a drop down here. These are all the measures that I have available in the category. This one happens to go to units working. As you go across, again, I'm just picking the measures in Stratum I want to map this to. So once that's done, I'm good to go. And the first thing I need to do is validate. So it's going to find out that this guy, so the question becomes, it will let me import data that doesn't have a valid record in Stratum, or you can go back to your spreadsheet and change that. So I'd have the choice. In this particular case, I want to go back to the spreadsheet, change this to be 304. This was just a fat finger mistake, and I need to go back and fix that. So that, you know, I just go back and I go back through the process, go into my spreadsheet and change it. But what I'll do is I actually have this spreadsheet up over here as well, just ready for import, so you guys don't have to live through that, be going and making that change. So this is all ready to go. Let's see. Actually, I probably do need to re-import that spreadsheet now that I said that. This should be 304. So this will just take a sec. And I'll do that. I'll update it. I forgot I changed the names on the headers, so the spreadsheet's actually different. So let's go back here, and all I got to do is go back. And this just says, do I want it? I say yes. I'm just going to do it again. And I'll ping in my opportunities from Excel. So that's going to run. That'll import the spreadsheet. Once that's there, I'll be good to go. And we'll get this thing ready to import, and then we'll go ahead and import it. While that's running, let me just kind of show you, I have another example over here that I wanted to show, which was importing a budget. So I'm going to pick a different spreadsheet here. I'm just going into another iteration. But you'll see this spreadsheet. It's going to bring this spreadsheet in. This is a much smaller spreadsheet in terms of the number of rows, but it has many more columns. And what you're going to see is that the columns have the months in them. And what you'll see in my configuration is, so this is, I'm going to tell it it's time series. Here I'm going to do replace as well. My target category in this case is my user forecast. This particular spreadsheet has 3 rows in the header, and the row that contains it is 3, and it's year. That's I think it's day. I forget what format. I think it's day, month, year. No. Oh, here it is, month, day, year. I think that's what it is. So going to do that, and you'll see that I have a spreadsheet that looks somewhat different than the one we imported previously. So I've got that same kind of, here's a region, a brand going across, but if I go out on the right, you can see I've got my months going across here, January, September, October, November, et cetera. So this data is going across the page, so we call that time series. Let's go back over here. I'm going to do a replace, and I'm going to go ahead and import this spreadsheet while I'm here, so just so you guys can see that. So right, I didn't map this, so it tells me I have to have a date. So I'm telling it that's the date. And over here, if you remember, I needed to go ahead and map the brand. I got the brand, yep. So did I get everything? I think I got everything. So yeah, here's the date. So I'm going to go ahead and import this. So it just, this is all you do is you just basically run this. And it's going to import that data. So we'll just wait a second, and that'll get imported, and that'll allow me to go ahead and run that and get that thing going. So let's see. It'll just take a second. I just heard I got an email. I just realized why that. So you can see this one as well. So I'll go ahead and import this. Here I need to map this over to the brand. I'm going to go down and show you the brand. Because one of the things that I've been that I like about this is it really this has gone, these data imports go relatively quickly. As you know, I said I have about 12,000 rows. You can see right here, this thing's in process. So anytime you have one in process, you can click, you can highlight it, click this, and it outputs a log for you to see where it's at in the process. So here you can see opening the log, it tells me what it's done. So it's in process, it's doing an ad, it's completed, saving the user mapping, it's going through, it's validating. And if I was to rerun this and open the log again, I get the next step that it's at. And what happens I'm going to go over into my email here, you can see you're going to get a email that lets you know that a data import has been completed. So one of the things that we see is the data will know when that's been completed. And I just got a second message. I just heard my second message come in. If I go over here, there it is. That's the second one I submitted. So that was 12,000 rows. And that was, by the way, that's all the way up into the cube. So that data that I just imported, if I go into Stratum and look at a view that uses that data, so that if I go into, say, a CRM view, here's opportunities by salesperson. So this column, yeah, here we go. This is the data I just imported. This is all those opportunities that I just imported. And really the other place you could see it is if I went into just thinking about how you might use data like this. If I go into value assessment, you'll see I used it in a scorecard as well. So now I've flushed out just general data for opportunities, as well as I've brought data in for this. And the last thing I wanted to show was when you bring data into Stratum and you're in data import, all of your previous levels and virtual dimensions are used as well. So everything, you know, on the customer or on the product side, I'm going to get product categories. Everything in blue is ultimately going to end up in Stratum, even though it wasn't in my import file. And that's because Stratum knows that product type is related to product group is related to product family, all those things you've defined in Stratum, they're related. So it's going to bring those in. The things in black are actually in the category, but we didn't have data for those. So there's